Am I live? I think I am. All right, so I can't waste too much time. I finally can go live at work again by using a mobile hotspot, but I only get free 50 gigs a month or something like that. Some craziness. And I don't know how much that really is. Mm-mm. All right, we're going to get right to it. Let's see. Going to share the screen. Come on. Here you go. All right. Jane Doe plaintiff, Sean Combs, Harvey Pierre, the third assailant, Daddy's House Recordings, Inc., and Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Inc. Ooh, this person about to get paid again. Not again, but see, they suing his companies and stuff. The insurance gonna pay it out. Just like they did Cassie. I wonder how much he's suing for. But we shall find out. So, hold on. Why are you acting like this? Okay. Plaintiff Jane Doe, Ms. Doe, hereby alleges as follows. Here's a preliminary statement. On November 16, 2023, hold on. I hope you folks can hear me. Y'all need to let me know. Can you hear me? I see you, one person. Can you just type in the chat and let me know if you can hear me? I think you should be able to. Okay. So on November 16, 2023, Cassandra Ventura, a.k.a. Cassie, filed a 35-page lawsuit in which she exposed Sean Combs for subjecting her to nearly a decade of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse punctuated by ape, ex-trafficking, and being forced to engage in drug-fueled, non-consensual sexual encounters with other men. Lord, what a way to open up a statement, right? Ordinarily, when a lawsuit such as Ms. Ventura's is filed that involves events that took place long ago, witnesses are few and far between and evidence hard to muster. Not so for the claims brought against Mr. Combs. Within minutes of the filing, salient facts of Ms. Ventura's claims were confirmed by various witnesses, including a rival musician whose car Mr. Combs blew up, as well as various individuals who observed Mr. Combs beat Miss Ventura. Only a few days later, okay, that's better. Only a few days later, two other lawsuits were filed against Mr. Combs. In one, plaintiff Joy Dickerson Neal alleged that Mr. Combs drugged and actually assaulted her when she was a college student. The other lawsuit accused Ms. Combs, it says Ms., and singer Aaron Hall of forcing the plaintiff and another unidentified woman into non-consensual acts. At the same time, a fourth lawsuit was filed, this one against Mr. Combs' companies and defendant Harvey Pierre, the longtime president of Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Inc. Bad Boy. The suit alleged that Mr. Pierre used his position of power at Bad Boy to groom and actually assault his former assistants, and that Bad Boy looked the other way at the time. Lord have mercy. This is now the fifth lawsuit filed against Mr. Combs in the last 3 weeks. Incredibly, the allegations brought by Ms. Doe are in many ways even more egregious than those brought by his prior victims. Specifically in 2003, when she was only 17 years old. She was only 17, but she was freaky. That's a Rick James song. And in the 11th grade, ooh, that bitch was left back, huh? Ms. Doe was ex-trafficked and gang raped by Mr. Combs, Mr. Pierre, and the third assailant. Who is the third assailant? And there's a one next to it, so there's a footnote at the bottom. In short, when she was just a teenager, Miss Doe met Mr. Pierre and the third assailant in a lounge in the Detroit, Michigan area. While at the lounge, Mr. Pierre insisted that he was best friends with Mr. Combs and even called Mr. Combs with Miss Doe. Mr. Combs convinced Miss Doe, who was half his age at the time, to accompany Mr. Pierre and the third assailant on a private jet to come to his studio in New York City. Before they left for the private jet, Mr. Pierre smoked crack cocaine in a bathroom at the lounge, in which he also actually assaulted Miss Doe by forcing her to give him oral X. Oh, the third assailant is a pseudonym. When the name of the third assailant is revealed during discovery, plaintiff will seek to amend the complaint to replace the pseudonym. Okay, gotcha. Wonder who the third assailant was. This is 2003, so it couldn't be Biggie because he's dead. I think by 2003, Craig Mack had already joined the cult. Couldn't have been Shy. All right, I'm shutting up and reading. Sorry. Mr. Pierre, third assailant, and another gentleman that then escorted the high schooler to a private jet, which flew them to Teterboro, New Jersey. There were SUVs awaiting the group at Teterboro, and the four of them were driven to Daddy's House Recording Studio, a studio famously owned and operated by Mr. Combs and Bad Boy. While at the studio, Mr. Combs and his associates, including Mr. Pierre, plied Miss Doe with drugs and alcohol. Well, isn't that special? And as the night wore on, the 17-year-old Miss Doe became more and more inebriated, eventually to the point that she could not possibly have consented to having sex with anyone, much less someone twice her age. While at the studio, Miss Doe was gang aped by Mr. Combs, the third assailant, and Mr. Pierre, in that order. While Mr. Combs was aping Miss Doe, he complained that he could not get off unless she pinched his nipples as hard as she could. Well, how was she so inebriated, but she remembered that shit? All right. Mr. Combs then watched on as third assailant, who Miss Doe had not even realized had begun to have sex with her, raped Miss Doe as she told him to stop. And after third assailant was finished, Mr. Pierre took his turn at aping Miss Doe and then violently forced her to give him oral X, during which Miss Doe was choking and struggling to breathe. So he was trying to shove his Johnson down her throat and was doing it like real hard, like, suck this. You better suck it. Mr. Pierre finished, or when Mr. Pierre finished, he left Miss Doe in the bathroom alone. Miss Doe fell into the fetal position and lay on the floor. Her Virginia was in pain. Finally, after a period of time, Miss Doe regained her bearings. However, she could barely stand up following that gang ape and had to be helped to walk out of the building and back into a car. She was taken back to an airport and flown back to Michigan. However, She has very limited recollection of her transport home and only remembers being in her car sometime early in the morning. Unlike many victims who have come forward after decades, Ms. Doe can prove that she not only met Mr. Combs on the night in question, but was in his studio in New York City with him on that night. Remember, when viewing these, Ms. Doe was 17 years old. Ooh, pictures. Mm, okay. Oh, look at that picture right there. Hey, I'm not trying to victim shame or anything. I just try to be objective and I try to be fair. Look how she's sitting. Okay. Mm, mm, mm. Let's carry on. Picture by her PD letters. What's this picture here? Just a picture of the studio. I don't really can't make out anything. A room or something. And there she goes again. Looks like she's in the bathroom. Is that a shower behind her? Oh no, that's a studio room. Okay. Miss Doe has lived with her memories of this fateful night for 20 years. Hmm. That means she's about 37 now. Really? 20 years, huh? Okay. During which time she has suffered extreme emotional distress that has impacted nearly every aspect of, and then it says, Miss Doe's face has been blurred in the following pictures for the purpose of anonymity. But her life, okay. Miss Doe has lived with her memories of this fateful night for 20 years, during which time she has suffered extreme emotional distress that has impacted nearly every aspect of her life and personal relationships. Given the brave women who have come forward against Mr. Combs and Mr. Pierre in recent weeks, Miss Doe is doing the same. Good for her. But she was sitting on Diddy's lap a little bit too freaky for her to be 17. Mm-mm-mm. To that end, Ms. Doe brings this action seeking injunctive, declaratory, and monetary relief against defendants in violation of the Victims of Gender Motivated Violence Protection Law, Gender Motivated Violence Act, NYC Administration Code, da 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 da. This court has jurisdiction over this matter pursuant to 28 blah blah blah, as this action involves citizens of different states and the amount in controversy in this matter exceeds $75,000. The court has supplemental jurisdiction over plaintiffs' related claims arising under state and city law pursuant to 28 U.S.C. Part of Michigan given rise to accident, including the unlawful employment practices and intentional and negligent tortious conduct alleged herein occurred in this district. Parties. Plaintiff Jane Doe is a citizen of Canada. Defendant Sean Combs is a citizen of the state of California. Defendant Harvey Pierre is a citizen of the state of New York. Defendant, the third assailant, is, upon information and belief, a citizen of the state of New York. Defendant Daddy's House Recordings, Inc., Daddy's House, is a music, media, and entertainment company founded and owned by defendant Sean Combs. Daddy's House is incorporated and headquartered in New York, New York. During the relevant time period, Daddy's House and/or Sean Combs owned and operated the Daddy's House recording studio, where Miss Doe was aped by Mr. Combs, Mr. Pierre, and third assailant. Now it's talking about the defendant, Bad Boy Entertainment, da 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 da. Um, okay, so factual allegations. In 2003, Ms. Doe was a 17-year-old 11th grader residing in the suburb of Detroit, Michigan. At the time, Mr. Combs was 34 years old, twice the age of Ms. Doe, and one of the most well known and influential music artists of all time. A decade earlier, Mr. Combs founded Bad Boy and installed his longtime girlfriend, Mr. Pierre, longtime friend, Mr. Pierre, into the role of president. I could have sworn I saw a girlfriend. All right. At the time, Mr. Combs had many connections to Michigan, including, among others, to the Black Mafia family, a drug trafficking and money laundering organization that is rumored to have seeded Bad Boy. Accordingly, upon information and belief, Mr. Combs' associates, including Mr. Pierre and the third assailant, spent significant time in and around Detroit, Michigan. Who would might the third assailant be? I hope it wasn't Andre Harrell. Can't sue him. He dead. I'm sure it wasn't Heavy D. Heavy D ain't had to get down like that. I'm curious. Who is the third assailant? On one evening between the spring and fall of 2003, Ms. Doe was out with friends. It was not uncommon for her and her friends to frequent bars and lounges in the Detroit area. Certain of Ms. Doe's friends were well connected with people in the music industry. On the evening in question, Ms. Doe was with friends in a lounge when she was approached by who she later learned was Mr. Pierre. Mr. Pierre was with his own friends, including the third assailant. Mr. Pierre, the third assailant, and their friends were dressed in suits. Mr. Pierre repeatedly complimented Ms. Doe's appearance, saying that she was hot, among other things. He then began talking about his self-described best friend and brother, Mr. Combs. Specifically, Mr. Pierre continually stated that Mr. Combs would love to meet Ms. Doe. Mr. Pierre even called Mr. Combs and put Ms. Doe on the line. Mr. Combs told Ms. Doe that he would love to meet her and that she should accompany Mr. Pierre to New York City in a private jet. Ooh. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Pierre directed Ms. Doe to go with him into the bathroom at the lounge. Once inside the bathroom, Mr. Pierre began to smoke crack cocaine from what appeared to be an aluminum can. Yeah, it can happen. After he finished smoking crack, Mr. Pierre suddenly took out his penis. Yeah, that happens often with a lot of people. You take a hit of crack and you got to whip your dick out. Or you take a hit of crack and 2 seconds later you need to choke a bitch to death. It happens. Demanded that Miss Doe suck his Johnson and force Miss Doe's head down to perform oral X on him. Now, I think Diddy had told him on the phone, see if this chick go, because, I don't want to be spending all this money and flying her to New York and she ain't going to give it up. So if she give it up to you in the bathroom there, she good to go to come. After sexually assaulting Miss Doe, Mr. Pierre directed her to accompany him, the third assailant, and a third member of their group to an airport in Pontiac, Michigan, where Signature, a fixed-base operator, had prepared a private jet to take the four of them to New York City. Upon information and belief, the private jet landed at Teterboro Airport. Upon departing the jet, two black SUVs were awaiting the group. Miss Doe got into an SUV with Mr. Pierre and the third assailant, and the other member of the group went to the second SUV. Y'all, is anybody having a problem with this besides me so far? And believe me, I am no fan of Diddy. I think that nigga's a duck. But this is very weird to me. It doesn't say they made her go by gunpoint, right? It's weird to me. Hold on. Let me check the chat. Anybody chatting? No. Just one person listening. Hello, one person. All right. Miss Doe got into an SUV with Mr. Pierre and the third assailant, and the other member of the group went in the second SUV. The SUVs brought the group to Daddy's House recording studio, a recording studio and hangout owned and operated by Mr. Combs and Bad Boy. Bad Boy, Bad Boy. They really lived up to his name, and we had no clue, right? When Miss Doe arrived, she was escorted into the building where she distinctly remembers seeing a sign for the company Technicolor. Okay. Upon entering the studio, Miss Doe first encountered Mr. Combs. And then she sat on his dick. I'm sorry, that's not what it says. Upon entering the studio, Miss Doe first encountered Mr. Combs. At the same time she arrived, a female recording artist was using the studio as Mr. Combs and her parents watched on. A female recording artist and her parents. 2003. Who might that be? I don't think it would be Mary. Come on, y'all, think. 2003. Wait, 2000. Would that be Cassie? Possible. She finished up shortly after Miss Doe arrived and left. While still in the studio section of Daddy's house, Mr. Combs asked Miss Doe to sit on his lap and take a picture. A copy of the photograph is below. If you sit on a man's lap like that, come on. You 17, you don't know this man. Puppy's a stranger. Just because you see him all up in the videos in shiny suits, don't mean you know him. Be sitting on his lap like that. Mr. Combs and Mr. Pierre and the third assailant began to ply Miss Doe, a 17-year-old child at the time, with copious amounts of drugs and alcohol. Does this even behave like a 17-year-old child? What child does that? I mean, you look at this picture, no wonder why Puffy came out and said, enough is enough. God damn it. While the evening became a blur, Miss Doe does recall Mr. Combs, Mr. Pierre, and the third assailant hitting on her incessantly, stroking her body, asking to see her ass, and telling her how hot and sexy she was. Various other pictures were taken in the studio that night, leaving no doubt that Miss Doe was in Mr. Combs' New York City studio with Mr. Combs on the night she was 8. Got another question. If it was so horrific, why would you keep pictures? Why would you keep pictures if you wasn't going to the cops or reporting it right away? I'm just asking a question. As the night wore on, the 17-year-old Miss Doe became more and more inebriated, eventually to the point that she could not possibly have consented to having sex with anyone, much less someone twice her age. Nevertheless, that evening, Mr. Combs directed Miss Doe to accompany him to the bathroom at the studio. Once there, Mr. Combs removed Miss Doe's skirt and underwear and penetrated her from behind with his anus while she hung over the sink. Good God Almighty. Miss Doe did not consent to having sex with Mr. Combs, but he continued thrusting. So you gonna suck off a dude all the way in Michigan in the bathroom of a bar, get in a car and go get on a private jet to meet Puff Daddy in New York City, sit on his lap giving him a hard Johnson while you take a picture, and then when he's thrusting you from behind in the bathroom, you say you didn't give him the consent to do that. You know, sometimes actions speak louder than words. But okay. At some point, Mr. Combs turned Miss Doe around to face him. He told her that he could not orgasm and asked her to squeeze his nipples as hard as she could to help him get off. He then turned her back around and continued to ape her. Okay, so let me get this visual correct. So he's thrusting her from behind, and he stops and turns around and says, "Look, I can't get off. You see my nipples right here? Squeeze them as hard, twist and turn, honey, as hard as you can." And I guess she's facing him and she's twisting and turning real hard. And then he turns her back around and continues. Because I can't imagine her being bent over and twisting these nipples hard behind her the way he likes it. That's too awkward and uncomfortable. But she is being aped, so who cares about comfort, right? By this point, Miss Doe was coming in and out of consciousness because of the Uggs and alcohol she had been given by defendants. You know, see, no, I wasn't there, but you know how people get down. It's making it seem like, you know, they got her there and told her to open her mouth, and they made her eat drugs and made her drink all this alcohol. Whereas in reality, she probably was sitting around getting high with them. But they was letting her get as high as she wanted to get. But when you read this, it gives you the impression, you know, that it was like, yeah, give her drugs, give her drugs. I don't believe it was like that. Her next memory was looking up into the mirror above the sink to find that the third assailant had replaced Mr. Combs and was aping her from behind. Mr. Combs was watching the third assailant actually assault Miss Doe from a chair outside of the bathroom. You know, something tells me that Diddy and R. Kelly probably had a few rendezvous. They both did the same stuff. Um, at this point, Miss Doe mustered the energy to tell the third assailant to stop and that she did not want to be having X with him. The third assailant did not stop and continued to ape Miss Doe, who did not have the strength to force him off of her. After the third assailant was finished, he was replaced by Mr. Pierre, who began by having non consensual Virginia X with Miss Doe before violently forcing her to give him oral X. And Puffy found this to be a big turn on while he sat in a chair and watched all this. What a bunch of widows. Young, black, rich widows. Mm-mm-mm. Mm-mm-mm. During the latter part of the actual assault, Mr. Pierre forced his anus into Miss Doe's mouth without her consent. You couldn't have been that high and that drunk to not have bit it off. What was they going to do after that? This is rich Puff Daddy and all of that. Never get so intoxicated where you don't have the sense enough to bite something off that's forced into your mouth. That's what I say. Miss Doe remembers that Mr. Pierre was sweaty and that she had difficulty breathing. What a nice way to say he was funky. Ew. Told you got to read between the lines. Miss Doe remembers that Mr. Pierre was sweaty and that she had difficulty breathing, meaning he was stink. I'd have bit that shit off and spit it right in his face. When Mr. Pierre finished, he left Miss Doe in the bathroom alone. Miss Doe fell into the fetal position and lay on the floor. Her Virginia was in pain. Finally, after a period of time, Miss Doe regained her bearings. However, she could barely stand up following the ang ape and had to be helped to walk out of the building and back into a car. She was taken back to an airport and flown back to Michigan. However, she has very limited recollection of her transport home and only remembers being in her car sometime early in the morning. Her underwear was missing. Diddy got them as a trophy. He probably never washed them. He got them in a secret stash someplace that requires a combination lock. And every now and then he goes and opens up that secret stash place and he sniffs them from 20 years ago. Can't tell me you don't do that shit. As a result of being aped by Mr. Cole, Mr. Pierre, and the third assailant, Ms. Doe suffered significant emotional distress and feels of shame that have plagued her life and personal relationships for 20 years. Ms. Doe knew that speaking out against defendants would be extremely difficult and that she would likely be subjected to retaliation and defamatory slurs, deform, defamatory, I'm sorry, defamatory slurs and attacks. Look, that picture says it all. And I don't know how clear you can see it, but she was clearly trying to give a man an erection while sitting on his lap. Come on, y'all. Let's not be stupid. No matter how you feel about Diddy or whatever, come on. Let's be fair. However, and I get it, she's still a child. Just because a child sits on your lap to give you an erection doesn't mean you should rape and ape and screw her. I get it. But this chick is closer to being a young adult than she is to being a child. Okay? Okay. However, in November 2023, Ms. Doe read about a lawsuit filed against Ms. Combs by Cassandra Ventura, a.k.a. Cassie. Ms. Ventura's suit described a decade of physical, sexual, and mental abuse. Most triggering for Ms. Doe was reading about Ms. Ventura's allegations of ex trafficking and being forced to have sex with other men against her will. Ms. Doe obviously understands that she too had been ex trafficked and that Mr. Combs' behavior in forcing women into non-consensual acts was not an isolated incident or unique only to Ms. Ventura. Then just days later, Ms. Doe read about a case filed against Mr. Pierre. The suit alleged that Mr. Pierre used his position of power at Bad Boy to groom and actually assault his former assistant. Seeing two other women bravely speak out against Mr. Combs and Mr. Pierre, respectively, gave Ms. Doe the confidence to tell her story as well. As such, she files this suit. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. The above described conduct of Mr. Combs, including but not limited to Mr. Combs' sexual assault of plaintiff in New York City, constitutes a crime of violence against plaintiff and is a crime of violence motivated by gender, as defined in da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The term crime of violence means an act or series of acts that would constitute a misdemeanor or felony against a person as defined in state or federal law, or that would constitute a misdemeanor or felony against property as defined in state or federal law if the conduct presents a serious risk of physical injury to another, whether or not those acts have actually resulted in criminal charges, prosecution, or conviction. And the term crime of violence motivated by gender means a crime of violence committed because of gender or on the basis of gender and due, at least in part, to an animus based on the victim's gender. The above described conduct of defendant Mr. Pierre, including but not limited to Mr. Pierre's sexual assault of plaintiff in New York City, constitutes a crime of violence against plaintiff and is a crime of violence motivated by gender. Blah, 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 blah. Pretty much the same thing that we just read. The above described conduct of defendant, the third assailant, including but not limited to blah, 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 is going to say the same thing. Defendant Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Inc. enabled defendant's commission of the crime of violence motivated by gender and is therefore also liable under the VGMVPL. As a direct and proximate result of the aforementioned crime of violence and gender-motivated violence, plaintiff has sustained and will continue to sustain monetary damages, physical injury, blah, 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 injunctive and declaratory relief, attorney's fees and costs, and other remedies, blah, blah, blah. The above described constitutes, because it was commenced within 2 years and 6 months after September 1st, 2022. Wherefore, plaintiff prays judgment be entered in her favor against defendants in each of them as follows. From a money judgment representing compensatory damages, including consequential damages, lost wages, earning, and all other sums of money, together with the interest on those amounts according to proof. For a money judgment for mental pain and anguish and severe emotional distress according to proof. For punitive and exemplary damages according to proof. For attorneys' fees and costs, for pre-judgment and post-judgment interest, for such other further relief as the court may deem just and proper. Dated December 6, 2023. Woo, child. And that's the end of it. That's the end of it. That's what it said. Hey, Harris. Thank you for stopping by. Happy holidays to you, too. Yeah. All right. So much for that. I'm going to go now. I just wanted to quickly get on and read it. So, y'all have a great day. Peace.